The crystal towers of Centauri Prime stretched up toward three purple suns like giant needles made of light. Ambassador Lisa Martinez pressed her face against the shuttle window and watched the alien city grow larger as they descended. Beside her, Commander Jake Harrison checked his uniform for the 100th time. His hands were steady, but Lisa could see the tension in his jaw. Today would change everything for humanity. The shuttle touched down on a landing pad that seemed to be made of solid diamond. Lisa stepped out first, her boots clicking on the strange surface. The air tasted different here, cleaner somehow with a hint of something like vanilla. Jake followed her, and together they walked toward the massive entrance of the Galactic Council building. Inside, the walls curved up and around them like they were walking through the inside of a soap bubble. Creatures from dozens of different worlds moved through the corridors. Lisa saw beings that looked like walking trees, others that floated instead of walked, and some that seemed to be made of pure energy contained in glass suits. None of them looked at the two humans. A tall blue creature with 4 eyes approached them. Its skin had patterns like flowing water, and when it spoke, its voice sounded like wind chimes. "I am Guide Velix. The Council will see you now. Please follow me and do not speak unless spoken to." They walked through corridors that seemed to go on forever. Jake whispered to Lisa, "How many species do you think are in the Council?" 247, Velix said without turning around. "You would be the 248th. The Council chamber was enormous. Rows of seats curved up from a central speaking area like an ancient amphitheater, but everything was made of that same crystal material. Hundreds of alien beings sat in those seats, all looking down at the small platform where Lisa and Jake now stood. The air hummed with translation devices working in dozens of languages. At the highest point sat a creature that looked like a cross between a butterfly and a person. Its wings shifted through different colors as it spoke. "I am Speaker Threnix. We have reviewed your species application to join our community. The debate will now begin." Ambassador Klex of the Vorthan Empire stood up. The Vorthans looked almost human except for their silver skin and completely black eyes. Klex was tall and wore robes that seemed to be made of starlight. "Honored Council, we must discuss what we have learned about these humans." Holographic displays appeared in the air above Lisa and Jake. Images of human history flashed by. Ancient battles with swords and shields, medieval sieges, ships firing cannons at each other, soldiers in trenches during the First World War, nuclear explosions, modern tanks and aircraft. "Look at this record," Klex said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "Thousands of years of constant warfare. They fight over land, over resources, over ideas. They have created weapons that can destroy their entire planet." A creature that looked like a giant jellyfish floating in a clear tank spoke next. Lisa's translator said it was Council Member Theiss of the Keltorian Federation. "Their history shows a species consumed by fear of conflict. They build weapons because they are terrified of being attacked. They study war because they are afraid of it." More images appeared. Human military bases, ships at sea, aircraft carriers loaded with fighters, soldiers training with advanced equipment, strategic missile submarines hidden beneath the oceans. "See how they prepare," said another voice. This came from a being that looked like it was made of living rock. "They train constantly for wars that may never come. They spend enormous resources on military forces. This is the behavior of a species paralyzed by fear." Jake started to step forward, but Lisa put a hand on his arm. She had seen this kind of tribunal before back on Earth. The decision was already made. They were just going through the motions of debate. Speaker Threnix's wings shifted to a deep red color. "The evidence suggests that humanity suffers from what our psychologists term conflict anxiety syndrome. They are so traumatized by their own violent past that they cannot stop preparing for the next war." A small creature with too many arms raised several of them. "But Speaker, they have not had a major global conflict in almost 80 of their years. Perhaps they are learning to overcome their violent nature." "Exactly," Klex said. "They fear war so much that they have finally begun to avoid it. But the fear remains. Look at their entertainment. Stories about battles and conflicts. Games where they pretend to fight. Movies about war. Even in peace they cannot escape their obsession with violence." Lisa wanted to laugh but knew it would be disaster. They had it completely backwards. Humans didn't make war movies because they feared conflict. They made them because they understood it. Every human child learned about the cost of war by studying history. But how could she explain that to beings who had never experienced real survival warfare? The Zentarans spoke next. They were peaceful beings who looked like tall, thin humans with pale green skin and large eyes. Our species resolved conflicts through meditation and understanding over 2 million years ago. We have not seen true warfare since. These humans clearly need guidance to overcome their fear-based aggression. The debate continued for hours. Species after species stood up to analyze humanity's problem. They talked about rehabilitation programs. They discussed therapy for an entire civilization. They debated whether humans could ever truly overcome their terror of conflict. Finally, Speaker Threnix called for order. Her wings had settled into a steady gold color. The Council has reached a decision. Humanity will be granted associate membership in the galactic community. Lisa felt relief flood through her. Associate membership was better than nothing. However, Threnix continued, given their psychological condition, certain restrictions must be applied. Human settlements will be limited to sectors designated as peaceful zones. Human ships may not carry weapons beyond basic defensive systems. Human military personnel may not participate in Council security operations. The relief turned to ice in Lisa's stomach. Humans will be classified as a conflict-averse species under Section 12 of the Galactic Accords. This classification exists to protect species that have been psychologically damaged by their own violent histories. With proper guidance and time, we believe humanity can overcome its fear of war and become productive members of galactic society. The chamber filled with the sounds of approval from hundreds of different species. Lisa looked up at Jake and saw her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had just made the biggest mistake in their history. They thought humans were afraid of war. They were about to learn how wrong they were, but not yet. For now, Lisa Martinez smiled and bowed to the Council. On behalf of humanity, we accept your generous offer of membership. We look forward to learning from your wisdom and contributing what we can to galactic peace. The translation devices carried her words to every corner of the chamber. What they didn't carry was the tone that Jake recognized from their military briefings back on Earth. It was the tone of a soldier accepting a mission. The tone of someone who knew exactly what they were walking into. The crystal towers of Zentari Prime gleamed in the light of 3 purple suns as the newest and most misunderstood member of the Galactic Council prepared to take their place among the stars. 5 years had passed since the Council meeting on Zentari Prime, and Dr. Amy Phillips stood on the observation deck of Research Station Echo, watching the sunrise over the rings of Kepler 442b. The view never got old. 3 moons hung in the purple sky like pearls, and the gas giant's rings caught the light of the system's twin stars. It was beautiful and peaceful, exactly what the Galactic Council had intended when they assigned humans to these outer rim territories. Amy sipped her coffee and checked the morning reports on her tablet. The xenobiology lab had made another breakthrough in understanding the plant life on the forest moon below. Her team had discovered that the blue trees could actually communicate with each other through their root systems, sharing nutrients and warning about dangers. It was the kind of discovery that made her love her job. The research station was one of 12 human facilities in what the galaxy called the safe zones. No military conflicts had happened in these sectors for over 1,000 years. The Galactic Council had been very careful about that. They wanted humanity to heal from their supposed trauma without being exposed to any violence. Captain Ben Rodriguez brought his cargo ship, the New Frontier, into docking bay, 2 right on schedule. Amy watched from the window as the sleek vessel settled onto the landing pad. Ben had been running supplies between human settlements for 3 years now, and his visits were always welcome. He brought news from Earth and the other colonies, plus the occasional luxury item that made life on the frontier more comfortable. Ben found Amy in the lab an hour later, carrying a crate of coffee beans from the plantations on New Brazil. "Fresh from home," he said with a grin. "Well, as close to home as we get out here." "You're an angel," Amy said, accepting the crate gratefully. "How are things on the shipping routes?" "Quiet, profitable. The Zentarans love our music and the Keltorians can't get enough of our literature. Apparently human storytelling is very exotic to them." Ben paused and his expression grew more serious. "Though I've been hearing some strange reports from the outer shipping lanes." Amy looked up from examining the coffee beans. "What kind of reports?" "Ships going missing near the galactic rim. The Vorthan Navy says it's probably equipment failures or navigation errors. Space is big after all. But some of the independent traders are talking about attack patterns. This caught Amy's attention. Her scientific training made her suspicious of coincidences. Attack patterns? Ben nodded. Ships disappearing in groups. Supply convoys vanishing without distress calls. Always in the same region. Always near the edge of mapped space. The Council says there's nothing to worry about, but you think differently. I think someone should be paying attention. The thing is, when human traders bring up these concerns, the Council dismisses them as paranoia. They say we see threats everywhere because of our psychological conditioning. Amy frowned. The Council's attitude toward human concerns had been frustrating from the beginning. Every time humans suggested improvements to trade routes or pointed out potential security issues, they were told they were being overly cautious due to their species' fear-based thinking. Meanwhile, on New Geneva, Lieutenant Colonel Sam Tucker finished his daily patrol report and uploaded it to the Galactic Defense Network. The monitoring station he commanded was officially just an observation post, tracking ship movements and monitoring communications in their sector. Unofficially, Tucker and his team of 43 personnel were doing much more than that. Tucker had been a military intelligence officer for 15 years before volunteering for frontier duty. He knew how to read between the lines of official reports, and what he was reading lately made him nervous. Ships weren't just disappearing randomly. There was a pattern, and the pattern was moving steadily toward more populated systems. His second-in-command, Major Lisa Chen, knocked on his office door. "Colonel, you need to see this." She handed him a tablet showing communication intercepts from the past week. "What am I looking at?" Tucker asked, though he was already beginning to understand. 3 more ships went dark in Sector 7-9. All of them were carrying the same type of cargo. All of them went silent at almost exactly the same point in their journey. "And sir, this is the 15th incident following this exact pattern." Tucker studied the data. The missing ships had all been carrying advanced manufacturing equipment, rare metals, and energy cores. Someone was specifically targeting vessels with military applications. "Have you sent this to Galactic Command?" "Yes, sir. They filed it under statistical anomaly and suggested we focus on our assigned duties rather than looking for threats that don't exist." Tucker wasn't surprised. The galaxy had been at peace for so long that most species had forgotten what a real military buildup looked like. Humans had not forgotten. Tucker had studied every major conflict in human history, and he recognized the signs of an enemy gathering resources for war. He opened his personal communication channel to Earth. The message would take 6 hours to reach home through the quantum relay network, but it would get there. Tucker began typing his weekly intelligence summary, the one that bypassed the official channels and went directly to General Kate Morrison at Earth Defense Command. Back on Research Station Echo, Amy was having dinner with Ben and her research team when the evening news came on. The holographic display showed Speaker Threnix addressing the Galactic Council about recent trade disruptions. While some of our newer members have expressed concern about shipping losses near the galactic rim, our investigation shows these incidents are within normal parameters for deep space travel. We remind all species that space is vast and dangerous, but there is no evidence of coordinated hostile activity. Dr. James Carter, Amy's deputy director, shook his head. "Normal parameters? 15 ships in 2 months? The Council doesn't want to hear about threats," Ben said quietly. "They've had peace for so long they think it's the natural state of the universe. When humans point out potential problems, they think we're just being paranoid because of our violent history." Amy thought about that. It was true that humans had a different perspective on conflict than most galactic species. Where other civilizations saw the absence of war as proof that war wouldn't come, humans understood that peace required constant vigilance, but the galaxy interpreted this as fear rather than wisdom. Over the following months, the pattern continued. Human traders, researchers, and frontier personnel sent reports about suspicious activity near the galactic rim. Ships continued to disappear. Long-range sensors detected unusual energy signatures in unexplored systems. Independent cargo haulers reported being followed by unknown vessels. Each report was filed away by the Galactic Council as evidence of human paranoia. The official response was always the same. Humans were seeing threats where none existed because their species suffered from conflict anxiety syndrome. They needed to learn to trust in galactic peace and stop projecting their fears onto innocent coincidences. What the Council didn't understand was that humans weren't reporting these incidents because they were afraid. They were reporting them because they were experienced. Every human child learned about Pearl Harbor, about 9/11, about all the times throughout history when people ignored warning signs because they couldn't imagine anyone would actually attack. The galaxy had made peace into a religion. Humans had made vigilance into a science. On New Geneva, Colonel Tucker continued sending his intelligence reports to Earth. In his personal log, he wrote, "The Council thinks we're paranoid because we prepare for threats. They don't understand that we prepare for threats because we're not paranoid. We know what happens to civilizations that assume peace will last forever." Dr. Amy Phillips published her research on the communicating trees, which became a galactic sensation. But in her private communications with Earth, she included detailed observations about shipping patterns, resource movements, and the strange energy signatures her deep space sensors were detecting. The galaxy saw a brilliant scientist studying alien biology. Earth Defense Command saw an intelligence asset in a perfect position to monitor potential threats. Captain Ben Rodriguez continued running cargo between human settlements, but his ship's sensor logs were automatically copied to military intelligence databases on Earth. His route took him through sectors where ships had been disappearing, and he made careful note of everything unusual he encountered. The aliens in the Galactic Council congratulated themselves on how well humanity was adapting to peaceful existence. They pointed to the successful research stations, the profitable trade routes, and the lack of any military incidents involving human personnel. Clearly, their strategy of keeping humans in safe, controlled environments was working. They didn't realize that humans were adapting, just not in the way the Council expected. They were learning alien technology, studying galactic military doctrine, and mapping defense networks. Most importantly, they were watching and listening and preparing for the day when all their warnings would finally be proven right. 5 years of peace were about to end, and only the humans saw it coming. The attack came without warning on a Tuesday morning Galactic Standard Time. The mining colony on Zerion Prime simply went silent in the middle of a routine ore shipment report. One moment the communication channels were filled with the usual chatter about quotas and equipment maintenance. The next there was nothing but empty static across all frequencies. Speaker Thrinix received the first reports in her private chambers on Centauri Prime. The crystal walls around her desk displayed holographic images from the last known transmission. Everything looked normal until the final few seconds when the camera shook and the image dissolved into interference. Her aide, a nervous Keltorian named Voss, stood beside her reviewing the data. "Could be a solar storm," Voss suggested, his tentacles twitching with anxiety. "Kauzerian's star has been unstable lately." But 3 hours later, the colony on Altair 7 went dark. Then the research station orbiting Beta Cygni. Then the trade hub at Rigel Junction. 5 systems in 12 hours. All of them losing contact at exactly the same moment their defense satellites stopped transmitting. By the time the Galactic Council convened an emergency session, 17 colonies had gone silent. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to see it. This wasn't equipment failure or natural disasters. This was invasion. Admiral Zorix of the Vorthon Imperial Navy stood before the assembled delegates, his silver skin gleaming under the chamber's crystal lights. "Honored Council, we are dealing with an unknown hostile force. Our scout ships have reached 3 of the affected systems. What they found was complete destruction." The holographic displays above the speaking platform showed images that made even the most peaceful species gasp in horror. Orbital stations reduced to glowing debris, planetary surfaces scarred by massive weapons, entire cities turned to glass by some kind of directed energy bombardment. The attackers left no survivors. Zorix continued. No prisoners, no demands, no communication attempts. They simply destroyed everything and moved on to the next target. From his seat in the observation gallery, Colonel Tucker watched the proceedings with growing frustration. He had been trying to get the Council's attention about suspicious activity in the Outer Rim for months. Now they were dealing with exactly the kind of coordinated assault he had predicted, and they still seemed surprised by it. Dr. Amy Phillips sat beside him, her face pale, as she watched the destruction footage. "How many people?" she whispered. Each of those colonies had between 50,000 and 2 million inhabitants. Tucker replied quietly. We're looking at the largest loss of life in galactic history. The council chamber erupted in panicked discussions. Some delegates called for immediate military response. Others suggested trying to establish communication with the attackers. The Zentarans proposed sending peace negotiators to find out what the invaders wanted. Then Admiral Zorix received a message that changed everything. A surviving scout ship from the Beta Cygni system had managed to record footage of the attacking fleet before jumping to safety. The images appeared on the main display, and a stunned silence fell over the chamber. The ships were massive, angular vessels that looked like they had been designed by someone who understood only destruction. Their hulls were covered in weapon ports and armor plating. They moved in tight formations with military precision, and they showed no interest in capturing territory or resources. They simply destroyed everything in their path and moved on. These are the Drakari, said a voice from the back of the chamber. Everyone turned to see Ambassador Kleck standing in the Vorthan delegation section. His black eyes reflected the holographic displays as he continued. We have heard legends of them from the edge of the galaxy, a warrior species that believes the universe belongs to the strong. The Drakari ships in the footage were unlike anything the civilized galaxy had ever seen, where council species built vessels for exploration, trade, or ceremonial combat. The Drakari had created instruments of war. Every line and angle was designed for maximum destructive efficiency. How do we fight them? Asked Speaker Threnix, her wings shifting to colors that indicated deep concern. Admiral Zorix activated tactical displays showing the current disposition of galactic military forces. The Vorthan Imperial Fleet numbers 3,000 vessels. The Keltorian Defense Force has another 2,000. Combined with allied forces from 12 other species, we can field approximately 8,000 ships. The numbers looked impressive until Zorix showed the projected size of the Drakari invasion force based on the scout ship reports. Intelligence estimates suggest they have at least 15,000 combat vessels, with more arriving from their territory every day. The mathematical reality sank in slowly. The Galactic Council was facing an enemy that outnumbered them nearly 2-1, and that enemy had already demonstrated complete ruthlessness in their attacks. Over the next several days, the galaxy's military response began to take shape. The Vorthan fleet, pride of the civilized worlds, assembled at Rally Point Alpha near the Sirius system. Their ships were beautiful works of art, with flowing lines and crystalline armor that caught starlight like prisms. Each vessel was commanded by officers who had trained for decades in the ancient traditions of honorable warfare. The Keltorians brought their psychological warfare specialists and ships, equipped with advanced sensor arrays designed to confuse and disorient enemies. Their strategy had always been to avoid direct combat by making opponents question their own motives and abilities. 12 other species contributed their own forces according to their particular strengths. The rock-like Thessians provided heavy assault ships. The energy beings known as the Flux offered to serve as living weapon systems. Even the peaceful Zentarans sent hospital ships and support vessels. It was an impressive display of galactic unity and military might. The combined fleet represented over 200 different species working together for the common defense. News broadcasts across the galaxy showed the magnificent vessels assembled in perfect formations, their commanders exchanging formal greetings and battle honors according to traditions that went back millions of years. Then the Drakari hit them, like a meteor hitting a soap bubble. The Battle of Sirius lasted exactly 47 minutes. The civilized galaxy's concepts of warfare involved elaborate maneuvers, formal challenges, and combat that followed rules developed over eons of civilized conflict. The Drakari understood none of these concepts and cared about none of these rules. They simply opened fire with every weapon they had and kept firing until nothing moved. Admiral Zorix died with his ship when Drakari dreadnoughts concentrated their fire on his flagship. The beautiful crystal armor of the Vorthan vessels proved useless against weapons designed for maximum destruction rather than ceremonial combat. The Keltorian psychological warfare techniques had no effect on an enemy that fed on fear and violence. Within an hour of the battle's end, refugee ships were fleeing toward the galactic core carrying survivors and news of the disaster. The mighty fleets of the civilized worlds were gone. 8,000 ships had been reduced to debris and radiation, taking with them over 4 million military personnel from dozens of species. The Drakari barely slowed down. Their own losses were minimal, and they immediately began moving toward the next tier of inhabited systems. Intelligence reports suggested they were heading for the major trade worlds and industrial centers that formed the backbone of galactic civilization. In the council chambers on Zentari Prime, panic replaced the earlier confidence. Speaker Threnix called emergency sessions as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Entire star systems were evacuating ahead of the advancing Drakari fleets. The careful balance of galactic civilization was collapsing as ancient alliances proved meaningless against an enemy that respected only strength. It was then that someone remembered the humans. Ambassador Lisa Martinez received the emergency summons while reviewing supply reports at the human embassy on New Geneva. The message was brief but desperate. The Galactic Council requested immediate assistance from all member species in the current crisis. Every available ship and resource was needed for the defense of civilized space. Lisa looked at the message and smiled grimly. 5 years ago, the Council had restricted humanity to peaceful sectors because they believed humans were too traumatized by war to be effective in combat. Now they wanted help fighting an enemy that had just destroyed the greatest military force the galaxy had ever assembled. She opened a secure communication channel to Earth and sent a simple message. They finally need us. Time to show them what humans do when the talking stops. On Earth, General Kate Morrison received the message in her office at Global Defense Command. Around her, walls displayed tactical information that her intelligence officers had been gathering for years. Ship movements, resource flows, communication intercepts, and detailed analyses of every military force in the galaxy. Morrison had been waiting for this moment since the day humanity joined the Galactic Council. She activated the emergency protocols that had been prepared for exactly this situation. Across human space, military personnel received mobilization orders. Ships that had been disguised as cargo vessels began revealing their true nature. Research stations started transmitting intelligence data that would make the galaxy's military commanders weep with frustration. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace above Keltor Prime like ghosts materializing from nothing. There were no grand formations, no ceremonial displays, no formal announcements. One moment the space around the besieged world was empty, except for burning debris from the planet's defense forces. The next it was filled with ships that looked nothing like what the galaxy expected from the species they thought were afraid of war. Captain Ben Rodriguez stood on the bridge of what used to be his cargo vessel, New Frontier. The ship still looked like a simple freight hauler from the outside, but the interior had been completely rebuilt. Where cargo holds once carried trade goods, there were now missile batteries and fusion reactors. The navigation computer that once calculated shipping routes now processed targeting data for weapon systems that most galactic species had never imagined. All ships. This is Wolf Leader. Rodriguez spoke into his communication headset. Remember, we're not here to look pretty. We're here to win. Execute attack pattern Delta. The human fleet scattered like a flock of birds startled by a predator. Where the destroyed galactic forces had maintained rigid formations and followed predictable attack patterns, the humans seemed to dissolve into chaos. Individual ships peeled away in different directions, moving at speeds that made Drakari commanders struggle to track them. But it wasn't chaos at all. Every movement was calculated, every ship's trajectory designed to put maximum pressure on specific points in the Drakari fleet formation. Rodriguez watched his tactical display as the plan unfolded exactly as they had practiced it hundreds of times in simulations. The first Drakari dreadnought died before its crew realized they were under attack. 3 human ships converged on it from different angles, launching missiles that had been programmed to adjust their approach based on the target's defensive responses. When the Drakari ship's automated defenses opened fire on the incoming weapons, the missiles split apart and attacked from 12 different vectors simultaneously. Admiral John Carter watched the battle unfold from his command ship, Resolute, hidden behind one of Keltor Prime's moons. Carter had fought in 3 different colonial wars before joining the Galactic Service, and he understood something that the aliens never had. War wasn't about honor or ceremony or following ancient traditions. War was about making the other guy die for his cause while you lived for yours. Status report, Carter said to his communications officer. Lieutenant Sarah Kim checked her displays. First wave successful, Admiral. Enemy formation is breaking apart. Wolfpack 7 has disabled 2 cruisers, and the Drakari flagship is taking heavy damage from coordinated strikes. On the planet's surface, the few surviving Keltorian defense coordinators watched in amazement as the human ships moved through the Drakari fleet like sharks through a school of fish. Where their own forces had tried to engage the enemy in honorable single combat, the humans attacked in groups, concentrated their fire on individual targets, and used every dirty trick in the book. Sergeant Maria Santos led her Marines through the corridors of a disabled Drakari battleship, moving with efficiency born of decades of urban warfare training on Earth. The Drakari were tough fighters, built like armored lizards with claws that could tear through steel, but they expected enemies to meet them head-on in glorious combat. Santos and her team didn't fight fair. They used flashbang grenades to disorient their opponents, then hit them with weapons fire from multiple directions. When the Drakari tried to charge, the humans fell back through prepared positions, leading their enemies into carefully planned kill zones. Boarding Team Alpha. "This is Santos," she reported as her squad secured the battleship's engine room. "Target neutralized. Beginning demolition charges placement." The Drakari had built their ships to be incredibly tough and heavily armed, but they hadn't considered the possibility that enemies might get inside and destroy critical systems from within. Human Marines moved through the captured vessel like a virus, disabling life support, destroying navigation systems, and setting charges that would turn the ship into a drifting hulk. Back in space, the tactical situation was shifting rapidly. The Drakari fleet that had seemed invincible just hours before was now scattered and confused. Their commanders had trained for thousands of years to fight enemies who followed the same basic rules they did. They had no idea how to respond to opponents who used deception, misdirection, and coordinated attacks from multiple vectors. Major Chris Powell led a squadron of human fighters in what the textbooks called an impossible maneuver. His 12 small craft approached a Drakari heavy cruiser from directly ahead, flying straight into its main weapons. At the last possible moment, they scattered in a pattern that had been perfected by human pilots during atmospheric dogfights centuries earlier. The Drakari gunners, trained to track large capital ships moving in predictable patterns, couldn't adjust fast enough to follow 12 small targets moving in 3 dimensions at maximum speed. Powell's fighters swept past the cruiser's weapons and launched their entire payload of armor-piercing missiles into the ship's reactor core. The explosion lit up space like a new star. Dr. Amy Phillips worked frantically in her mobile laboratory aboard the hospital ship, Mercy, analyzing Drakari physiology from captured soldiers and recovered bodies. Her xenobiology training was proving unexpectedly useful in combat situations. Every weakness she discovered was immediately transmitted to human forces throughout the fleet. "The respiratory system has a critical vulnerability," she reported to General Morrison via quantum communication. "If you can introduce certain atmospheric compounds, their lung efficiency drops by 60%. I'm uploading the chemical formulas now." Within minutes, human Marines were loading specialized gas grenades that turned the Drakari's own biology against them. What had seemed like an unstoppable warrior race was suddenly struggling to breathe in environments that humans found perfectly comfortable. The battle for Keltor Prime lasted 18 hours. When it ended, the Drakari invasion fleet was either destroyed or retreating toward the galactic rim. The planet's surface was scarred but intact, and its population of 4 billion Keltorians had survived what everyone assumed would be their extinction. In the aftermath, representatives from dozens of galactic species arrived to see what had happened. They found human ships docked at orbital stations, human medical teams treating wounded civilians, and human engineers helping to rebuild damaged infrastructure. But these weren't the same humans the galaxy thought it knew. Ambassador Klex of the Vorthan Empire met with Admiral Carter aboard the Resolute 3 days after the battle. The Vorthan's black eyes studied the human command bridge, taking in details that he had never expected to see on a ship crewed by a supposedly peaceful species. "Your tactics were unlike anything in our military databases," Klex said carefully. "Where did you learn such methods?" Carter smiled without humor. "We learned them the same place we learned everything else about war. From 10,000 years of fighting for survival on a planet where the only rule was that the strongest and smartest species got to keep existing." The reports that reached the Galactic Council over the following weeks painted a picture that shattered every assumption they had made about humanity. The humans hadn't just defeated the Drakari through luck or superior technology. They had outthought them, outmaneuvered them, and demonstrated an understanding of warfare that made the galaxy's military experts look like children, playing with toys. General Morrison established her command center on the liberated world of Keltor Prime and began coordinating the next phase of human military operations. Intelligence reports suggested that the defeated Drakari fleet had been only the first wave of invasion forces. More enemy ships were coming, and they would be expecting the tactics that had worked so effectively in the first battle. That was fine with Morrison. Humans had been adapting their military doctrine in the middle of conflicts for millennia. It was what they did best. In his private chambers on Zentari Prime, Speaker Threnix reviewed the battle reports with growing amazement and concern. The species the Council had pitied for being traumatized by war had just demonstrated military capabilities that exceeded anything in galactic history. Their ships were faster, their tactics were more flexible, and their soldiers fought with a combination of intelligence and ruthlessness that no civilized species could match. "How did we get it so wrong?" Threnix asked her aide. Voss consulted his data tablets nervously. "It appears we misinterpreted their preparations for conflict as evidence of fear, rather than expertise. Their entire civilization has been shaped by continuous warfare, making them far more capable than we realized." Threnix's wings shifted through colors that indicated deep thought. The galaxy had asked for humanity's help in desperation, expecting them to contribute supply ships and medical support. Instead, they had received an ally whose understanding of warfare made their own military forces look primitive. The question now was whether the cure might prove more dangerous than the disease. The Drakari could be defeated, but what would happen to galactic civilization when the humans no longer needed to hide their true nature? For the first time in her long career, Speaker Threnix wondered if the Galactic Council had just made a bargain that would change everything forever. The war ended not with a glorious final battle, but with a simple message transmitted across all frequencies in the Drakari language. "We surrender." The proud warrior race that had swept through galactic space like a plague had been reduced to a broken fleet hiding in the outer darkness, begging for mercy from enemies they no longer understood. Admiral John Carter stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the last Drakari dreadnought power down its weapons systems. Around him, human officers monitored displays showing the complete collapse of what had once been the most feared military force in the galaxy. The campaign had taken 8 months, but the outcome had been inevitable from the moment humans stopped pretending to be harmless traders and researchers. General Kate Morrison arrived on Zentari, Prime aboard a ship that looked nothing like the vessels the galaxy had expected humans to build. The Retribution was sleek and deadly, with armor that seemed to absorb light and weapon systems that made even the peaceful Zentarans nervous. Morrison walked through the crystal corridors of the Council building, flanked by Marines whose equipment and bearing marked them as professional soldiers, not the frightened refugees from a violent past that the aliens had imagined. Speaker Threnix waited in the main chamber, her wings displaying colors that indicated deep uncertainty. Around her sat representatives from every major species in the galaxy, all of them struggling to understand how their assumptions about humanity had been so completely wrong. "General Morrison," Threnix began, her voice carrying through the translation systems to every corner of the chamber. "The Galactic Council wishes to express our gratitude for humanity's role in defeating the Drakari invasion. Your species has saved countless lives and preserved galactic civilization." Morrison nodded politely, but her expression remained neutral. She had been preparing for this conversation for months, knowing that the galaxy would eventually demand answers about humanity's true nature. "However," Threnix continued, "we must address certain concerns that have arisen during the conflict. The military capabilities your species demonstrated were far beyond what we had been led to expect. Some of our members feel that humanity may have been less than completely honest during the original membership negotiations." Ambassador Lisa Martinez, who had been standing quietly beside Morrison, stepped forward. "Speaker Threnix, with respect, we were completely honest. You simply chose to interpret our honesty as something else." The chamber erupted in whispered conversations, as delegates tried to understand what Martinez meant. She waited for quiet before continuing. "When we applied for membership, we provided complete historical records of our species. We showed you our wars, our weapons, our military preparations. We told you about the cost of conflict and the importance of being ready for threats. You interpreted all of this as evidence that we were afraid of war. Morrison activated a holographic display, showing footage from the recent campaign against the Drakari. Human ships moved through space with deadly precision, striking at enemy weak points with tactics that no galactic species had ever imagined. Ground forces advanced through hostile territory using coordination and flexibility that made traditional military doctrine look primitive. This is what 10,000 years of continuous warfare actually teaches, Morrison said quietly. Not fear but mastery. Not trauma but expertise. You assumed we were broken by our violent history. Actually, we were refined by it. Colonel Sam Tucker, now promoted to general, stood up in the observation gallery. The Drakari made the same mistake you did. They thought warfare was about strength and aggression. They never understood that real war is about adaptation, intelligence, and the willingness to do whatever works. The aliens in the chamber stared at the tactical displays showing human military operations. Every engagement followed the same pattern. Human forces would analyze their enemy, identify weaknesses, and then exploit those weaknesses with ruthless efficiency. Where galactic military doctrine relied on honor and tradition, humans used deception and innovation. Captain Ben Rodriguez, still commanding his converted cargo ship, had participated in the final assault on the Drakari home fleet. His report to the council was devastating in its simplicity. They fought the way they always had. We adapted to fight the way they couldn't handle. That's the difference between a warrior culture and a survivor culture. Dr. Amy Phillips had spent the war analyzing alien psychology and biology, turning her scientific training into a weapon against humanity's enemies. Her research had led to breakthroughs in understanding how different species thought about conflict and how their biological limitations could be exploited in combat situations. The galaxy has been at peace for so long that you forgot what war actually looks like, Phillips explained to a gathering of alien scientists. You ritualized it, turned it into ceremony and tradition. We never had that luxury. On Earth, war was always about survival, so we learned to be very, very good at it. The implications were staggering. Every species in the galaxy would need to completely reassess their understanding of military affairs. The humans they had pitied as traumatized and fearful were actually the most dangerous military force in known space. Their preparations hadn't been driven by anxiety, but by competence. Their caution hadn't been paranoia, but by wisdom earned through centuries of conflict. Speaker Threnix asked the question that everyone was thinking. What happens now? The Drakari threat has ended, but you have capabilities that far exceed any other species in the galaxy. How do we know you won't use those capabilities against us? Morrison smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. Because that's not how humans think about war. We don't fight for conquest or glory or because we enjoy it. We fight when we have to protect what matters to us. Right now, what matters to us includes this galactic community we've worked so hard to join. She gestured to the tactical displays still showing the aftermath of the Drakari campaign. You want to know the real difference between us and them? The Drakari destroyed everything they conquered. We spent more resources rebuilding the worlds we liberated than we did on weapons to free them. It was true. Human engineering teams were working throughout former Drakari territory, helping rebuild infrastructure and restore damaged ecosystems. Human medical personnel were treating wounded civilians from dozens of different species. Human supply ships were delivering food and medicine to refugee populations. We're not conquerors, Morrison continued. We're gardeners. We fight to protect the garden, not to burn it down. Over the following months, the galaxy slowly began to adapt to its new reality. Human military advisors worked with alien defense forces, teaching them tactics and strategies that actually worked against real enemies, rather than ceremonial opponents. The results were transformative but also humbling for species that had considered themselves the pinnacle of civilization. Colonel Tucker established a military academy on New Geneva, where officers from across the galaxy could learn what humans called practical warfare. The first lesson was always the same. Forget everything you think you know about honor in combat, because your enemy certainly will. Captain Rodriguez found himself in command of a joint task force responsible for patrolling the galactic rim, watching for new threats that might emerge from unexplored space. His mixed crews of humans and aliens learned to work together, combining human tactical flexibility with alien technological advantages. Dr. Phillips continued her research, But now her work focused on understanding how different species could fight together more effectively. Her discoveries about alien psychology proved just as valuable for cooperation as they had been for warfare. The Galactic Council formally reclassified humanity from conflict-averse species to military specialists, a new category created specifically to acknowledge their unique capabilities. The restrictions on human settlement and military participation were lifted, replaced by requests for human involvement in galactic defense planning. But perhaps the most important change was in how the galaxy thought about peace itself. Where they had once assumed that advanced civilizations naturally evolved beyond warfare, they now understood that peace was something that had to be maintained through strength and vigilance. Ambassador Martinez stood once again in the crystal chamber where humanity had first been judged and found wanting. This time, she addressed the council not as a supplicant seeking acceptance, but as a representative of the species that had saved galactic civilization. "You thought we feared war," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "You were wrong about that. What we fear is being unprepared for war when it comes anyway. What we fear is losing the things we care about because we were too proud or too peaceful to defend them." She paused, looking up at the delegates from hundreds of different worlds. "The universe is not a safe place. Peace is not the natural state of existence. Both of those things require constant work and eternal vigilance. That's what our history taught us. That's what we tried to tell you 5 years ago when you first welcomed us as the species too frightened to fight." The final irony was that humanity had indeed been shaped by fear, just not the kind of fear the aliens had imagined. Humans weren't afraid of war itself. They were afraid of being caught unprepared when war came to them.